The loudspeaker echoed through the departure hall of Atlanta International Airport, calling passengers of Flight 7A to San Francisco to prepare for boarding. Amid the bustling crowd with rolling suitcases clattering against the marble floors, a young woman in a light pink wool coat walked gracefully holding a plane ticket and passport. Her name was Imani Rhodes. Imani wasn't looking for attention, but something about her made people glance not because of arrogance, but due to a composure unusual for someone in her 20s. Her eyes sparkled with joy. She had just graduated with honors from a prestigious talent program in New York, and the Educational Foundation of Morning Ski Air awarded her a distinguished scholarship. Her father, Malcolm Rhodes, served as CEO of this airline. Yet no one at the airport knew her identity. Even the staff at the check-in counter merely offered polite smiles when she presented her first-class ticket. "Have a pleasant flight," one said, completely unaware that the young woman before them was the only daughter of the airline's chief executive. Imani liked it that way. She had once told her father, "I don't want special treatment. I want to be judged by who I am and what I work for." And Malcolm had always respected that. After over 2 years of studying abroad, she had never used the Rhodes name to open doors. Today's flight from Atlanta to San Francisco was her journey home after more than 730 days away from her father. Imani stepped into the first-class lounge. Soft yellow lighting reflected off the polished wooden floors. Plush leather chairs surrounded her, and smooth jazz hummed gently from the ceiling speakers. A group of white men in suits whispered about business in one corner. A middle-aged woman read a newspaper. No one noticed her, and she liked it that way. She chose a quiet seat near the window overlooking the runway. While waiting to board, she texted her father, "About to board, seat 1A, first class in every sense." On the other end, just a minute later, Malcolm Rhodes replied, "Buckle up. Princess, there's a gift waiting for you at home." Imani smiled softly. No one saw it, but something inside her heart fluttered an overwhelming happiness only a daughter returning home could feel. Meanwhile, in another corner of the terminal, the lead flight attendant of Flight 7A was reviewing the passenger list. Colleen McGrath is a white woman in her 40s with tightly pinned blonde hair and eyes trained in constant assessment. Colleen didn't like surprises. To her, first class was for the right people, in the right place. She had once remarked to a colleague during internal training, "We're opening up first class to too many kinds of people. First class isn't for everyone." Today, as she scanned the passenger list, her eyes paused at the name Imani Rhodes. It's a strange name. No VIP note. There are no signs of anything special. Just a young female passenger traveling alone. Still the surname. Rhodes made her hesitate for half a second, but she brushed it off. Just a coincidence. She muttered, unaware that this very moment would become the beginning of the greatest mistake of her career. Imani stepped into the priority lane for first-class passengers at the boarding gate. In front of her, a silver-haired businessman was greeted by Colleen with a warm smile. "Wonderful to see you again, Mr. Franklin." Behind him was a middle-aged white woman, acknowledged by Colleen with a nod. "Seat 2C, right side of the aisle." Then it was Imani's turn. She held out her ticket. Colleen looked at it, and her expression immediately changed. Her smile vanished, her eyes turned cold, and her voice shifted to authoritarian economies down. "That way, young lady." Imani frowned slightly and replied politely, "Sorry, this is a first-class ticket. Seat 1A." Colleen didn't touch the ticket. She glanced at it and replied, "I think there's been a mistake. Please move to the rear." Behind them, the line of passengers was growing restless. Imani remained composed. "There's no mistake. The ticket clearly states it. I've checked in already. If there's any issue, you can verify it in the system." Colleen narrowed her eyes. Suspicion was written all over her face. There was only one possible explanation in her mind. This young black woman was trying to sneak into a place not meant for her. And then in a low voice, sharp as a blade, Colleen said, "If you don't comply, I'll call security." Imani stood still and exhaled slowly. She was still holding her ticket. Everything around her seemed to slow down. She understood she was about to step into something far greater than a seat, greater than a flight. And she had no idea that just a few hours later, the entire country would know the name, Imani Rhodes. Imani remained where she stood right at the boarding gate in front of increasingly impatient passengers. Her plane ticket was still in hand, her gaze fixed squarely on Colleen McGrath, the lead flight attendant trying to push her out of first class, not through logic, but cold prejudice. Colleen crossed her arms, eyes filled with challenges. "I don't want to make a scene, young lady," she said, her voice lower but sharper. "But if you don't step aside, I'll have to call airport security." The tension hung tight as a wire. A few murmurs rippled through the line. "What's going on? Doesn't she have a ticket? Is this some kind of scam?" Imani didn't move. Her face didn't show anger, but the gentleness had faded from her eyes. She looked straight at Colleen and spoke. "If you believe I don't belong in first class, scan my ticket. But if you're refusing me simply because of my skin color or my age, then I suggest you think again. I'm not giving up my seat because I haven't done anything wrong." Colleen hesitated for a split second, but instead of de-escalating the situation, she turned to a nearby colleague, a young male flight attendant, and whispered loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Looks like she wants trouble. Call security." Each word was fuel to the fire. The eyes around Imani sharpened, not indifferent anymore, but watchful, judgmental, even wary. Instantly, she was no longer a passenger. She was a problem. And then, 2 airport security officers appeared. Imani was pulled out of the boarding line. A passenger behind her spoke up, uncertain. "But doesn't she have a ticket?" No one answered. Colleen looked at the 2 security guards and said plainly, "She's in the wrong cabin. Non-compliant. Please help me resolve this quickly so we don't delay the flight." One of the officers, a middle-aged man in a blue uniform, approached Imani gently but firmly. "Ma'am, we were called to assist. May I see your ticket and ID?" Imani responded calmly, without bitterness or pleading. "Of course." She handed over the ticket and ID. The officer checked them. His eyes widened as he read the bold print. "Morning Ski Air, first class, seat 1A, Imani Rhodes." Then he slowly looked up at her for the first time, not as a man on duty, but as a human being, suddenly aware of a looming mistake. "Ticket is valid." "Ms. McGrath." He turned to Colleen. Colleen stepped forward, snatched the ticket from his hand, glanced over it and frowned as if she'd just spotted a typo. She still didn't back down. Could be a system error. Same last name in this girl. She stopped just in time. But that pause said more than any completed sentence. Imani stood tall, eyes locked on Colleen. "What were you about to say? That I don't look like first class?" No one answered. The air froze. Then a voice rose from across the boarding area, clear, firm, and for the first time on Imani's side. "That's discrimination." A white middle-aged woman in a beige coat stepped forward from the rows of seats near the gate. She pointed at Imani, then turned to the security officers I'm seated in. 1C. I saw her in the first-class lounge. She has all her documents. If you're escorting her away just because that flight attendant feels uncomfortable, I'll testify. Colleen was stunned. For the first time, she wasn't in control. The officer handed the ticket back to Imani and nodded. "You're cleared to board. Apologies for the inconvenience." Imani turned to walk forward, but her heart felt heavy. She didn't smile. She didn't say thank you. Because the so-called right to board had never been something to be granted, she walked through the aircraft door, quietly placed her carry-on in the overhead bin, and sat at 1A, exactly where she belonged. But her mind was far from settled. The glances from passengers around her, curious murmuring, some sympathetic, some suspicious, felt like invisible needles pricking at her skin. Behind her, Colleen stood frozen at the entrance, her face pale, fingers gripping her tablet like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She knew this wasn't over. And she was right, because the man sitting in the highest office of Morning Sky Air CEO Malcolm Rhodes was about to receive a message from his daughter Dad. "I'm okay, but something happened. I'll tell you later." And to Malcolm Rhodes, both a father and a leader, that was the most dangerous message he had ever received. A meeting was underway in a conference room on the 42nd floor of Morning Sky Air's Manhattan headquarters. On the large screen, brightly lit flight route, maps glowed. CEO Malcolm Rhodes, dressed neatly in a charcoal gray suit, was listening to a report from the head of route operations. But he wasn't listening anymore, because on the phone beside his tablet, a message had just appeared so simple, it was chilling. "Dad, I'm okay, but something happened. I'll tell you later." Just 12 words. But to Malcolm, a man who had once managed the most significant public relations crisis in aviation history following a passenger data leak in 2017, he knew no message like that ever came, if it was just something small. Imani wasn't someone who complained. She had never griped about dorm food or being placed in the wrong classroom. His daughter was always calm, independent, and fiercely proud of never hiding behind her father's name. And that's precisely why. The message struck like a warning siren. He immediately grabbed his phone and opened the tracking app he and his daughter used to follow flight information. Flight number MK317, seat class 1A, confirmed status. Departed from San Francisco, en route to New York. Estimated arrival, 1744. Malcolm frowned. His leadership instincts kicked in. He checked his watch. 3.5 hours to go. Enough time to find out what had happened, and if needed, enough time to prepare for a confrontation. At over 10,000 meters in the air, Imani sat silently by the window in the quiet of the first-class cabin. Her ears still picked up the plane's low rumble, but her mind had drifted far beyond. Everything had happened in less than 15 minutes, yet it felt to her like an entire lifetime. The suspicious stares. Colleen's voice rang like a hammer against her skull. "You should return to economy class. That's where you belong." She had imagined all kinds of things that could go wrong on a flight, from technical issues to unruly passengers. But she never imagined that she, a properly documented, well-mannered, clearly credentialed passenger, would be pulled from her seat simply because she didn't look like someone who belonged. She unlocked her phone, catching a faint Wi-Fi signal, and drafted the following message. "It's about a staff member on the flight. She forced me out of my rightful seat. Everyone around saw it happen." She paused before sending. Would sending it now worry her father during a busy workday? Would it make him angry? No. She knew her father. Malcolm Rhodes didn't get angry by slamming fists. He got angry by going silent and then taking action. And once he decided to move, an entire system would follow. She hit send. At that very moment, back in Manhattan, Malcolm stood up abruptly. He called to his assistant. "Get me flight operations for MK317. I need the name of the lead flight attendant." "Yes, sir." 3 minutes later, the assistant returned with a printed document. Lead flight attendant, Colleen McGrath. Seniority, 11 years. Internal notes. 2 passenger complaints. In the past 18 months related to unprofessional behavior toward young passengers of color. Malcolm narrowed his eyes. That last line was like a hidden blade, unpublicized. Not strong enough for formal action, but enough to tell him something wasn't right. He sat down, opened his computer, and typed in a few executive-level access codes to view the flight service log, a privilege granted to the CEO. Immediately, the preliminary log popped up. Passenger 1A, Imani Rhodes, boarding note. Requested seat verification. Lead attendant McGrath. No additional details. But that single line, requested seat verification, was enough, because there was no reason to question seat 1A, unless the person sitting there didn't look like someone who should be sitting there. Malcolm placed a direct call to the executive VP of in-flight services. I want whoever's in charge when MK317 lands. Have them meet me at the jet bridge. What happened, sir? We'll find out in a few hours. But I want to be at JFK at 5:30 p.m. and make sure Ms. Colleen McGrath is aware. I'll speak to her before any passengers leave that plane. The call ended. He stood, adjusted his collar, and left the conference room. No explanation. Because a father was coming. A storm named Justice was landing with flight MK317. On flight MK317, the afternoon sunlight filtered through the tiny window shades, casting a faint glow across Imani Rhodes' face. But that light wasn't enough to soothe what was steadily growing in her chest. A wordless ache. She was no stranger to prejudice, to growing up in a world where designer shoes or an Ivy League scholarship still weren't enough to erase the color of her skin. But never before, not in first class, a place where she had every legitimate reason to be, had someone treated her like an intruder. In the front row, Colleen McGrath stood chatting with an older man in a suit, her voice sweet and gentle, the picture of a model flight attendant. She smiled as if she hadn't just dragged a young black woman from her seat 20 minutes earlier. And that was precisely what made Imani feel cold. A dishonest silence had settled over the cabin. No one spoke. No one stood up, even though they had seen. The middle-aged man with reading glasses and the young woman scrolling through her phone. Several eyes had flicked toward Imani as she was led back to the economy. But then they all looked away, as if nothing had happened. Complicit silence. The politeness of the upper class is used to shield injustice. Imani sat upright, hands clenched around the edge of her sweater, eyes locked on the window. Her mind was anything but calm. Then, almost reflexively, she pressed the call button. Ting! A soft sound rang out. No one came. She waited. 5 minutes. Then 10. No one showed up in the economy. Meanwhile, Colleen was still pouring red wine for the passenger in 2B, smiling like she'd stepped out of a commercial. Imani lowered the call button, sat back and sighed. But when Colleen finally walked toward the back of the plane carrying no drinks, offering no apology, she decided to try again. This time, Colleen stopped directly beside Imani's seat, standing straight with her hands clasped in front. What do you need? Her voice was colder than the air pressure outside. Imani looked up, soft but firm. I requested water over 10 minutes ago. Colleen pursed her lips, nodding as if she had remembered something utterly trivial. Oh, I was busy serving the forward cabin. She turned to leave. The forward cabin is the one I paid for. Imani added, not loudly, but just enough for a few nearby passengers to turn their heads. Colleen didn't reply. She pressed her lips tighter and walked briskly back toward the front of the plane. Still, there was no water. 5 minutes later, Imani took out her phone. She was done keeping quiet. Her fingers typed quickly. Dad, she's continuing to make things difficult. No service, no response, no respect. I'm tired, but I don't want anyone else to go through this after me. Send in the cabin. The silence began to crack. A young black girl, around 10 years old, from seat 27B, quietly walked up to Imani when she saw Colleen leave. Her neatly braided hair framed her bright, thoughtful eyes as she looked at Imani with rare compassion. I saw it, the girl whispered. Imani was surprised, but smiled gently. Saw what, sweetie? That lady. Earlier, I heard her say, "That girl doesn't look like someone who sits in first class." The words landed like a knife. Imani swallowed hard. "Thank you for telling me. What's your name?" "Layla," the girl whispered. "Layla, I won't forget." Layla nodded and returned to her seat, but in her eyes, something quiet was beginning to grow. Up front, Colleen had just received a message from the captain. "Mrs. Harper, please report to the auxiliary cockpit. Emergency order from the company president." She turned pale. President," she repeated, her lips dry. The captain nodded. "He'll be at JFK. In person." "What? What happened?" "He says it's about a first-class passenger who was mishandled. His daughter." Colleen froze. A chill ran down her spine. She glanced back toward the economy cabin, where Imani was seated, staring directly at her, unflinching. For the first time in over 10 years of flying, Colleen McGrath realized that something bigger than internal policy was coming. Not just a report, not just a warning, a confrontation. And this time, she wouldn't be holding the blade. In the auxiliary cockpit, a red indicator light blinked on the internal phone. The words, "Secure line," "Incoming," repeatedly flashing like the rapid heartbeat of Colleen McGrath. She swallowed hard, her lips dry and cracked. Captain Harold Reyes, a seasoned pilot with over 3 decades of flight experience, reached for the phone. He knew one thing: no one called the secure line mid-flight unless it was something severe. A deep, clear male voice came through. "This is Isaiah Rhodes, Chairman and CEO of Atlantic Airlines. I need to speak directly with the flight attendant in charge of passenger services on MK317. Colleen felt her blood pressure drop as the captain turned to her. He didn't have to say anything. She already knew. This call was for her. She took the phone with both hands, as if holding something unbearably heavy. "Good afternoon, Mr. Rhodes. This is Colleen McGrath, lead flight attendant in charge of this flight." His voice cut her off, gentle, but slicing like a blade. "Did you just remove my daughter from her first-class seat?" Colleen's throat tightened. Her mind spun. "Sir, I didn't know she was your daughter. I was following protocol. And if you had known, you would have treated her differently." He interrupted, his tone calm yet cold enough to freeze the air. "No, that's not what I meant. I thought." "You thought what?" Colleen had no answer. A suffocating silence. Isaiah Rhodes continued, this time, his tone slower, yet even firmer. "I've raised my daughter to understand that no one has the right to define her worth by her skin color. But today, you proved that people still wear a flight attendant's hat, but carry a segregator's heart." Colleen fell silent. "I didn't call to hear your apology. I called to inform you that I will be at JFK Airport when your plane lands, and I want to hear you explain in front of your full cabin crew why a fully ticketed first-class passenger was degraded simply because she's black." A pause. "And if you can't provide a justified explanation, then you'd better have your resignation paperwork ready." The call ended. The red light stopped blinking, but the color had drained from Colleen's face, as if not a single drop of blood remained in her veins. In the passenger cabin, the atmosphere began to shift. A few passengers, noticing Colleen's sudden change in demeanor, from haughty to rattled, started whispering among themselves. A middle-aged woman in seat 3D leaned toward her husband and murmured, "I think she's in trouble. She was so smug earlier, and now she looks like she's been summoned." Her husband nodded, eyes still fixed toward the rear of the aircraft, where Imani Rhodes still sat calmly, phone in hand, gaze locked on the front of the cabin. She knew, and she was waiting. In seat 19, a young passenger had just opened a social media app. A short video of Imani being asked to vacate her first-class seat had been posted by someone anonymous, but it was now spreading like wildfire. The caption was bold: "Black girl kicked from first class for not looking the part. But wait until you know who her dad is." He glanced at the view. Count 48,000 views, 120,000 views, 192,000 views. It was rising by the second. He muttered to himself, "Damn, that flight attendant is done for." Back in the economy, Imani received a message from her father's assistant. "The video is going viral. He's activated the PR team to prepare for media response. As for you, stay calm. The storm is coming, but it's not meant for you this time." Imani took a deep breath. Everything she had endured. The dismissive looks, the cabin's complicit silence. Colleen's smug smile was now stepping into the light, and it wasn't just justice for her. It was for everyone who had ever been pulled away from where they rightfully belonged. Colleen returned to the passenger cabin, the arrogance drained from her expression. Every step she took felt unsteady. The eyes of the passengers, no longer admiring, now questioned her. Some began to speak out openly. "What's going on, miss? Are you the one who kicked the black girl out of her seat? You should apologize to her." Colleen said nothing. Her lips clamped shut as she hurried into the galley at the back of the plane. But what she tried to run from was closing in. And at JFK Airport, a man was waiting, not with authority, but with the truth. The atmosphere in the cabin had turned strange, silent but not peaceful, like the moment before a storm, when everyone senses the shift, but no one dares say it aloud. Imani Rhodes remained seated in 23, calm, composed, but her eyes swept the cabin like a satellite, scanning for every glance and every shift in expression across the crowd. The passengers around her knew. The news no longer needed whisper networks. It was erupting by the minute across social media. The video of her being removed from first class was spreading simultaneously on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. A middle-aged man seated beside her turned hesitantly. "Young lady, I just wanted to say, I saw what happened. No one deserves to be treated like that. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." Imani turned, offering a soft smile. "Thank you, sir. But you're not the one who needs to apologize." Colleen stood in the crew galley, the space usually meant for short breaks, water refills, or light conversation among the attendants. Today, no one spoke. Colleen gripped her phone tightly, her hands trembling slightly as breaking news headlines kept flashing across the screen. Atlantic. Sky flight attendant ejects black girl from first class, unaware she's the CEO's daughter. Imani Rhodes trends after shocking in-flight discrimination. Call for boycott racism at 30,000 feet. She scrolled down and saw a photo of herself, unclear whose camera had captured it, but it was now circulating across forums. In it, she stood pointing, commanding Imani to leave her seat. The caption beside it read, "This is what everyday racism looks like. Silent, polished, and unapologetic." Colleen gasped. A young flight attendant. Madeline approached carefully, about to ask something, but upon seeing Colleen's panicked expression, she turned and walked away. Colleen leaned against the mini fridge, her heart pounding. Not from cabin pressure, but because the mask of civility she'd worn for years had just fallen off in front of the entire world. In the cockpit, Captain Harold Reyes was delivering the landing announcement, but this time his words were shorter, firmer. "We will be landing at JFK Airport in a few minutes. Please, fasten your seatbelts. Cabin crew remain on board until further instruction from operations." Colleen heard the last part and felt her stomach drop. She turned to Madeline. What does that mean? What are they going to do?" Madeline didn't respond. She knew exactly what it meant. When a captain issues a hold for operations order, it isn't protocol. It's a prelude to disciplinary action. Imani opened a message from her father. "A car is waiting. Your brother Andre and I will board the plane. Let us handle everything. Attached is a note from the media team. Assistant NBC, CNN, and The Root have all requested interviews. Would you like to appear? Imani didn't reply immediately. She looked out the window. The sky outside was descending, the lights of New York City beginning to pierce through the clouds. For the first time, she felt like she was returning, but not in peace. She was coming back to witness a reckoning. The PA crackled through the cabin. We've arrived in New York. Please remain seated until the aircraft comes to a full stop. Seatbelts clicked open. Passengers rummaged for their bags. Everything looked normal like any other flight. But this time, every gaze was fixed on the cabin door. And then, it opened. A tall black man in a sharply tailored black suit stepped inside with a calm but resolute stride. There was no mistaking him. Isaiah Rhodes. Behind him came Andre Imani's older brother and two senior executive assistants. The cabin went silent. A few passengers held their breath. Some instinctively pulled out phones, not daring to record, but silently capturing every second. Isaiah said nothing. He walked down the aisle, eyes on no one until he stopped at seat 23A. He leaned slightly, looking at his daughter. Are you okay? Imani nodded softly. I'm okay. But they're not. Isaiah's shoes echoed through the first-class cabin as he turned and walked to the front. Every step made Colleen feel like her heart was collapsing inward. She was already standing, but didn't dare look up. Isaiah stopped, standing tall before her, his voice calm yet commanding. Ms. McGrath, I believe you remember what I said on the phone. Colleen nodded, unable to form a word. Now I'll ask you again, and this time before the cabin crew, passengers, and the entire leadership of Atlantic Sky. Can you explain why you thought a black girl didn't deserve to sit in first class, even though she had a fully valid ticket? The entire cabin held its breath. Colleen stood alone under the stark white lights and the silent judgment of dozens of eyes. And for the first time in her life, she realized privilege was no longer her armor. It had become her shackles. Colleen McGrath stood frozen in place. Isaiah Rhodes's question, neither shouted nor aggressive, cut through the air like a blade, stripping away every professional mask she had ever worn with pride. From economy to first class, no one said a word, but the stares, the quietly raised phones, and the countless soft clicks of cameras spoke louder than any voice could. Colleen swallowed hard, her throat dry as dust. Mr. Rhodes, she began, her voice trembling. I didn't know she was your daughter. If I had known. Isaiah raised one hand, not in anger, but enough to silence her. This is not about my daughter. This is about... He locked eyes with her. Any black passenger in a suit, well-spoken, walking into first class. Would you have done the same thing? That question, that was the heart of it all, and it froze the entire cabin. Colleen faltered. Her voice grew faint. I didn't mean to. I just suspected because of her skin color. Isaiah finished the sentence for her. His tone wasn't raised, but each word fell like lead. In the middle of the cabin, a white, middle-aged woman turned to her husband. That's awful. I have a daughter that age. I can't imagine her going through something like that. Meanwhile, behind Imani, a young black man nodded slowly, his eyes locked on the live stream playing on his phone. Colleen struggled to maintain her composure. I was just following protocol. What protocol? Isaiah raised an eyebrow. The one that allows employees to remove valid ticket holders from first class. The one that sorts out who looks like they belong in leather seats and who doesn't. Colleen was speechless. At that moment, a ping came from the internal communications system. A flight attendant quickly handed Isaiah a tablet connected directly to the airline's command center. The screen displayed current TikTok views. 3 million shares. 1 million comments. 420,000. Hashtag justice. For Imani trending. 1 globally. Isaiah scanned the data, then nodded slightly to a senior assistant who stepped forward and handed Colleen a thick envelope bearing the Atlantic Sky logo. This is a notice of immediate suspension. All system access was revoked. A formal disciplinary summons will be delivered via email within 24 hours. Colleen stared at the envelope as if she couldn't understand it. Her lips moved, but no words came. No one stood beside her. Not a single voice rose to defend her. A young passenger stood up, raising a hand like he wanted to speak in her defense. But instead he said, "She deserves this. People like that don't deserve to represent any airline." Isaiah turned to his daughter in the hushed cabin. His words were clear. "Imani, are you ready to return to first class?" Imani rose, her shoulders straight, her head held high, but her eyes were warmer now, because she didn't feel alone for the first time on this flight. She wasn't alone. She walked forward behind her father, as soft applause began, quiet at first, then growing louder, not because she was the CEO's daughter, but because she had stood tall, kept her dignity, and reclaimed the place she had rightfully earned. When Imani returned to her original seat in first class, the one Colleen had wrongfully ordered her out of, just hours earlier, a different flight attendant clearly brought in as a replacement, approached gently. She bowed slightly and offered a glass of water. "Ms. Rhodes, welcome back if you need anything. Please, don't hesitate to let me know." Imani didn't respond immediately. She looked directly into the woman's eyes, which looked nothing like Colleen's. No fear, no arrogance, just a professional doing her job with dignity and kindness. Imani gave a slight nod, then said, "Just don't judge me before I even speak." The attendant smiled. "Never, ma'am." Meanwhile, JFK Airport buzzed on the ground with activity. Special pickup vehicles and cameras from multiple news networks all waiting for the aircraft to land. While Atlantic Sky scrambled to prepare an official press release, the public had already given it a name. The Rosa Parks moment at 30,000 feet. The wheels screeched against the wet runway of JFK Airport, marking the end of what was supposed to be an ordinary flight. But as the Boeing 787 came to a complete stop, that was when everything truly began. Outside the window, 3 black SUVs, a live broadcast van with the CNN logo, and a long line of reporters were already in place. Cameras aimed at the plane like they were waiting for a head of state. Inside the cabin, no one moved. No one stood up, even though the seatbelt sign had turned off. Every passenger was waiting. They didn't know exactly what was coming, but they all felt it. Clearly, they were witnessing a historic moment. In the first class, Isaiah Rhodes adjusted the cuff of his shirt. He glanced at his daughter. She remained upright, phone in hand, her gaze unwavering. Imani lowered her phone and exhaled softly. 4 million views. In under 3 hours. Isaiah nodded. But that video isn't just about you. It's about everyone who's ever been told to leave their seat. Not because of a wrong ticket, but because of the wrong skin color. A soft ping, door unlock signal. A ground staff member stepped in. First, nodded respectfully to Isaiah, and then whispered into a handheld radio. Moments later, 3 people boarded the CEO of Atlantic, the Vice President of Human Resources, and a senior communications representative. They were dressed sharply, but none of them smiled. No flowers, no polite greetings, just tense expressions and a silence filled with awareness. Mr. Rhodes, the CEO, began his voice low and solemn. "On behalf of the entire leadership team, I want to apologize directly to you and Ms. Imani. What happened on Flight AS-144 is inexcusable." He didn't get to continue before Isaiah spoke. "This is not just about me or my daughter. He stood. His voice was deep, clear, and echoing across the cabin. This is about everyone who's ever been told, that seat isn't for you, simply because they didn't wear the right color or didn't look like someone wealthy. In the cabin, heads nodded. Someone wiped away a tear. A woman whispered, "First time I've seen someone say this, right in front of the people in power." The CEO nodded. "We understand, and we're acting." He turned to the communications team and gestured. A folder was handed to Isaiah. An emergency internal memorandum, including immediate suspension of the entire crew involved. Independent third-party internal investigation. Launch of a mandatory behavioral bias awareness program for all Atlantic Sky staff worldwide. The official statement from the board chair is to be broadcast nationally at 8:00 p.m. tonight. Isaiah skimmed through it. Imani glanced at him, then nodded softly. "Good," Isaiah said, "but I don't want apologies behind closed doors. I want it to be heard so that the people following this story, especially young Black people, know that someone is standing with them." The CEO understood. He didn't respond with words, only bowed deeply and silently. The cabin door opened wide. Imani stepped out first. The cold wind hit her face, but she didn't flinch. Isaiah followed, then the members of the executive team, and every camera instantly turned toward the 19-year-old Black girl in a simple gray coat whose eyes shone with a strength untouched by fear. A CNN reporter reached out with a mic. "Ms. Rhodes, is there anything you want to say to the millions following your story right now?" Imani didn't hesitate. She said, "Never let anyone decide your place, whether on a plane or in life." That night, every 8 p.m., news broadcast led with the same headline: Imani Rhodes, removed from first class for being Black, turns out to be the airline CEO's daughter. Justice for Imani soared to the #1 global trend. Peaceful protesters gathered outside the airline's headquarters, holding signs that read, "Seats have no labels. Dignity doesn't need a ticket." And somewhere else in a small cafe in Mississippi, a young mother pointed to the screen and said to her daughter, "See that people may try to erase you, but if you stand tall, you'll make the whole world look back." At precisely 8 p.m., TV screens across America switched to a live broadcast. Against the familiar navy blue backdrop, the Atlantic Sky logo appeared. Yet no one cared about the airline tonight. Every eye was on the man walking up to the podium. Isaiah Rhodes, chairman of Atlantic. He wore no suit, no tie, just a father and a leader, with eyes that were tired but resolute. He didn't begin with a carefully written speech. He began with the truth. "I'm Isaiah Rhodes. I'm not just the head of Atlantic Sky Airlines. I'm also the father of a girl who was publicly humiliated on a flight operated by the very company I lead. She wasn't humiliated because she did anything wrong. She was humiliated because of the color of her skin, something a service professional decided wasn't fit for first class." The camera tightened on his face. Not a single excuse. Just pain mingled with determination. The blame doesn't lie with one individual. It lies with us. Those who allowed a biased, quietly prejudiced service culture to persist, unchallenged. And tonight, that changes. The press conference lasted less than 20 minutes, but it detonated like a cultural explosion. Atlantic Sky suspended the entire crew indefinitely, pending an independent third-party investigation. A new oversight board comprised civil rights activists, cultural scholars, Black journalists, and former flight attendants. The airline pledged $10 million to launch the Open Skies Scholarship Fund, supporting students of color pursuing careers in aviation hospitality and customer service. Most notably, Isaiah Rhodes announced he would forego his 6-month salary, with all funds redirected to anti-discrimination programs in the service industry. That same evening, Justice for Imani reached 32 million mentions in 12 hours. But the hashtag wasn't just viral. It sparked real change. Passengers from the flight began posting testimonials, videos, blog posts, comments, confirming Imani's account. One older man wrote, "I sat nearby, never seen anyone treated with such disrespect and still carry themselves with such grace." Competing airlines quietly released new zero-tolerance discrimination policies. Some even approached Imani to be their public ambassador. Late-night talk shows from Trevor Noah to Jimmy Fallon opened with the story, but not to joke, to ask. If she hadn't been the CEO's daughter, would anyone have listened to her? Thousands of people, Black, Asian, Latinx, and even white individuals who had been removed from their place, shared their own stories using the hashtag #IWasMovedToo. A national conversation had begun about silent discrimination, where it isn't slurred that wound, but looks, gestures, and quiet power. Subtle, polished violence disguised as policy. At an auditorium on Howard University's campus, a space that had hosted countless historic civil rights dialogues, a new poster was hung. Guest speaker Imani Rhodes, "I wasn't the only one." And hundreds of young students waited in the registration line, not because she was a CEO's daughter, but because she didn't stay silent even when she stood alone. In a shelter home in St. Louis, a young black teen sat in front of an old phone, typing a comment. "Next time someone tells me I don't belong somewhere, I'll remember Imani Rhodes." But amid the praise, a new question started to spread online. What will happen to Claudia Burke, the flight attendant? Should she be forgiven? Is she remorseful? Or just another person waiting to be forgotten? The story wasn't over. It had only begun a new chapter where Imani was no longer a victim. She was a symbol, not because of what was done to her, but because she had turned humiliation into a movement. The fifth-floor apartment in the Stonewood housing complex sat tucked beneath an old overpass just 15 minutes from the city center by bus. But tonight, Claudia Burke felt like she had been pushed to the very edge of the world. She didn't turn on the lights. Only the faint blue glow of her phone screen lit the room, where her name was now trending on Twitter, attached to hashtags. "No one ever wants their name," beside "racist flight attendant. I was moved too." "She didn't belong, you," said Claudia, had silenced her phone after the 27th notification. Now it was at the 84th. The last message from her 14-year-old daughter was only 7 words, "Mom, why does everyone hate you?" That question cut deeper than any public criticism. In Claudia's mind, the scene replayed on a loop. Imani's composed gaze, her restrained voice as she was sent back to economy, the tearless face that endured the full stare of the cabin. Claudia had once believed she was merely following procedure. But now, staring into the mirror, she didn't recognize the person looking back. "I didn't hate her. I just thought. A black girl in that seat didn't look right." The words slipped from her lips, and even she was disgusted by them. Not because she'd been exposed, but because she finally understood the truth she'd long avoided. She wasn't just wrong. She had once believed she was right. A half-empty glass of wine from earlier in the evening sat cold and untouched in the kitchen. Claudia reached for it, then stopped. Not out of morality, but nothing could soothe a conscience that was no longer worthy of soothed. She opened her laptop. I logged into the airline's email. Her account hadn't been locked yet. Dozens of messages flooded the inbox from HR internal legal press inquiries, and one with the subject, "Request for Statement." Within 24 hours, Claudia sat down, head lowered. She opened a blank page for the first time in her 17-year career, not to defend herself, but to confess. Subject: I have no justification. Dear Mr. Isaiah Rhodes, I don't expect your forgiveness. I'm not writing to salvage my dignity or my job. I'm writing because my daughter asked me. "Mom, are you a bad person? And I can't lie to her anymore. I was wrong. Not because she's your daughter. I was wrong because I believed my tone, behavior, and instincts were reasonable. I brought prejudice into the cabin and disguised it as professionalism. I am living proof of quiet racism. The kind that needs no slurs, no shouting, just a suspicious glance and a nod that says, 'Not you.' If you grant me a chance not to work again, but to learn, I will stand before the entire staff and tell my story. Not as a victim, but as someone who once let blindness lead the way and has now chosen not to follow it again." Claudia. She hit send, no shaking, no expectations. Release. A few days later, the email was forwarded to the executive board and quietly spread through internal forums like a shockwave. Many called her a performative fraud, apologizing only after being caught, but others, especially young flight attendants of color, admitted, "It's the first time I've seen a white person admit it wasn't a slip-up. It was systemic." Claudia's email, though never made public, sparked a deeper conversation within the company. Can redemption be real? Or are some actions beyond apology? 1 week later, Victor Rhodes, without prompting, sent her a reply. No praise, no forgiveness, just an invitation. Come and tell that story to 300 employees at headquarters. If you dare to face it, we will listen. Claudia stood in front of her mirror, her old uniform still hung in the closet. The last time she wore it, she thought she represented standards. This time, if she wore it again, she knew she would have to become living proof of transformation. No one asked her to make amends, but she wanted to. Before it was too late, on a crisp autumn morning, the main auditorium at Rhodes Air headquarters was packed. 300 employees across departments, veteran flight attendants, maintenance engineers, and ground crew sat silently before the central podium. On the screen behind them, there were no strategic plans and no revenue growth charts, just a simple white sentence. When we don't realize we're hurting others, a voluntary testimony by former flight attendant Claudia Burke. In the front row, Victor Rhodes. The airline's chairman sat with his arms folded, expression unreadable. Beside him was Imani Rhodes, the woman once removed from first class. Today she wore a black suit, her hair neatly pinned, her gaze sharp but composed. A side door opened. Claudia entered. No uniform, just a plain white shirt, black pants, and a pair of eyes that had seen too much. No one clapped, no one booed. The air was thick as iron. Claudia stood silently at the microphone, took a long breath, and began no notes or slides. My name is Claudia Burke. I was a first-class flight attendant at this airline for 17 years, and I once believed I wasn't racist, just following protocol. But I was wrong, and I stand here not to ask for forgiveness, but to face myself before the very people I once looked down on, without knowing it. The auditorium remained still. I once removed a black woman from first class, simply because she didn't look like the image I was used to. I didn't scream at her. I didn't publicly insult her. But I doubted, I questioned. I denied her presence with a glance, my tone, and a silence soaked in power. And that is the most dangerous thing of all. A black female employee in the third row bowed her head. A white flight attendant beside her frowned, as if understanding something for the first time. Claudia continued, voice steady, but thick. I asked myself, why did I react that way? Why did I, a mother, a woman, someone who's cried over injustice, become the one who caused it? And the answer was horrifying, because I didn't think I was wrong. I thought I was protecting a standard. But when a standard means pushing someone lower for the color of their skin, it's no longer a standard. It's institutional bias, dressed as order. The room stayed silent, but something had cracked open. A veteran Indian flight attendant covered his face. A white technician flexed his fingers nervously. Claudia lowered her tone. I used to be proud that I never said a racist word, but the most dangerous kind of racism doesn't live in what we say. It lives in what we've never questioned. I'm not here to get my job back. I'm here to ask you, those who still have the chance to look at yourselves before you end up where I am today. A quiet sob rose from the back row. Claudia scanned the room, not rushing to the end. Then slowly, she removed the necklace from around her neck, the one she had worn since her first day on the job. This is the service pin I was awarded in 2010 for excellence in care. But today I'm returning it, not because I don't value it, but because I want it worn by someone who truly deserves it. Someone who serves with both skill and self-awareness. And if there's one thing I ask, it's not to let this apology disappear after one meeting. Let it become a real conversation. In crew lounges, cockpits, break rooms, about how we see others. Claudia bowed her head. No one walked up to replace her. No one clapped immediately. But, in one brief moment, the entire room rose. Not because they had forgiven her, but because they had listened. After the session, many employees left handwritten letters for HR. A newly hired flight attendant wrote, I used to think staying silent didn't hurt anyone. Now I understand. Silence in the face of injustice is its form of violence. Thank you for saying what no one wants to hear. Claudia left the auditorium without celebration, without relief, but knowing she was no longer the same person, and whether she would return or not. Today, she had begun atonement in the only way it truly begins. By facing herself with the truth. 1 month after the internal testimony, Rhodes Air held a launch ceremony for its new training center, titled the Imani Initiative, Center for Equity and Diversity Training. The event occurred at company headquarters in Atlanta, but was far from a PR stunt. It was an explicit declaration. From now on, kindness is no longer a recommendation. It is the standard. Victor Rhodes stepped onto the stage. No drama, no news cameras. Just a father, just a leader. He wore a plain white shirt, holding a plaque bearing the name of the new center. In the audience sat executives from competing airlines, federal regulators, union representatives, and notably over 200 aviation students invited to witness the event as a living classroom. Victor looked around the room, then spoke. That day, I didn't come as a CEO. I came as a father when my daughter was removed from the seat she rightfully earned. But today, I'm not here to relieve that pain. I'm here to talk about the opportunity. The opportunity for each of us to become witnesses to change, not with slogans, but with actions. Imani sat in the second row. She wore a beige blazer, her eyes no longer angry, only calm. The look of someone who had come to understand the pain and the meaning behind it. After the speech, Victor passed her the microphone. The room fell utterly silent. Imani stepped forward. No notes, no slides. I'm not a victim. I survived an experience that no one, especially someone who did everything right, should endure. I'm not here to recount every detail. I'm here to say this. Don't let an airplane cabin designed to honor distinction become a symbol of exclusion. And don't let a single suspicious glance destroy the self-worth a child took a whole childhood to build. The room held its breath. She continued. I once believed that people would see me fairly if I worked hard enough, but I forgot something important. Fairness doesn't come from the effort of the seen. It comes from the awakening of the one who sees. Applause broke out, not thunderous, but deliberate, careful, as if they feared interrupting a voice, speaking on behalf of thousands who had long remained silent. After the ceremony, Rhodes Air announced its new policies. All flight attendants must undergo periodic evaluations for unconscious bias. The executive board will host quarterly, no uniform days, allowing employees at every level to speak freely without the pressure of rank. Each employee will receive a reflection box where they can privately log any moments of unintentional bias for self-review. And most notably, Imani Rhodes was officially appointed Director of Inspiration and Internal Equity, even though she had not yet graduated. 3 months later, a young flight attendant approached a middle-aged black man dressed modestly in the first-class cabin of a flight from Boston to Seattle. After checking his ticket, she smiled warmly. "Welcome aboard, sir. We're honored to serve you today." "Thanks. Honestly, I'm not used to this part of the plane." She leaned down slightly and said softly, "You know what? The founder of our training center was once kicked out of first class, just because someone decided she didn't belong here. And she's the reason I understand today. Politeness isn't enough. We need the courage to stand for what's right." The man smiled, not because of the sparkling wine on his tray, but because he knew he had just stepped into a real first-class cabin, a place where dignity doesn't need to be proven, only respected.